Happy Pound Sauvignon Blanc Day. I'm in trouble already because it's hashtag Sauvignon Blanc Day. This is the fourth one that we've done. I'm pretty excited because I'm a Sauvignon Blanc fan, of course. I'm Michael Scholes. I'm the winemaker at St. Supéry here, of course, in Napa Valley. So hopefully a lot of you know about us and what we're doing. We make a fair bit of Sauvignon Blanc. We're big supporters of the wine. We have a fabulous vineyard at Dollarhide where we grow our Sauvignon Blancs, and we've been doing this for a long time. So here we are. We're here with a panel of folks, and we're here with moderator Linda Murphy, and Linda's right here. She's a fantastic person, known her for a long time. She's the wine writer and US correspondent for YancesRobinson.com. She's been a two-time James Beard Award winner as wine editor for the San Francisco Chronicle. She also writes for Gander Magazine, Wine Review Online, Napa Sonoma Magazine, and what's more, has just finished a fantastic book, American Wines with Yances Robinson. So, Linda Murphy.
Thank you, Michael. And also thank you to St. Supéry for putting in all the energy to make this event happen. It doesn't come together overnight, so I think we all recognize that it's a great opportunity to be here. Our purpose today is to address Sauvignon Blanc globally. We're going to be tasting wines from four countries, but not just tasting the wines, but talking about the differences, stylistic decisions that winemakers make. We're going to talk about regionality, about what climate and soils do to the style of the wine, and get a broad overview of Sauvignon Blanc. It's the best time of year to be doing this. It's springtime. We're already feeling like summer here in Napa Valley, and I can't think of a more refreshing, crisp, and appropriate wine to drink this time of year than Sauvignon Blanc. I'd like to introduce our panelists. To my right, now we've had the Aussie accent from Australia with Michael. Now we've got a Kiwi accent in Bob Campbell. Bob is from New Zealand, lives near Auckland. He is a Master of Wine, which is quite a difficult title to achieve, so bravo for that.
Thank you.
He's an internationally known wine writer. He judges multiple competitions throughout the country, including the Decanter World Wine Awards, which were held 2 weeks ago, I believe, in London. He is the regional chair running the competitions for the New Zealand wines. So Bob is certainly capable of speaking to the New Zealand wines we have today. He's also graduated some 20,000 students from his own wine diploma program, so a great educator as well.
Fantastic.
And then to my far left is Chuck Hayward. Chuck is a dear, dear friend of mine. I can't think of anybody in the United States who knows more about Australian and New Zealand wine than Chuck. He spent 23 years at the Jug Shop, a top retail shop in San Francisco, and is now with J.J. Buckley, an equally fine wine shop in Oakland. So he's moved his talents across the bay. So thank you all for being here. I think we should just get right to the tasting, and we're going to be talking about style. That's really why we're here. We're sort of a style council to help anybody who doesn't quite know what sort of Sauvignon Blanc they like, what sort of Sauvignon Blanc they should buy. If they don't have a Chuck Hayward in a shop to explain style to them, we're going to try to give you some basics on that here today. So first up is Chuck Hayward. We're going to go to France for our first two wines. Chuck?
Hi. Thanks very much for the opportunity to taste with you all today.
I need to repeat again. If you'd like to ask us questions, that is hashtag Sauv Blanc. And if you'd like to correspond with St. Supéry Winery on any specific questions or statements, comments you have, you go to at St. Supéry. So, Chuck.
All right. Thanks again for letting me be part of the panel today. This is my first internet TV show kind of thing like this. So it's,
as is mine.
Oh, excellent. Cheers.
We're done.
Absolutely. Here we go.
But it's a great opportunity to talk about one of my favorite grapes, Sauvignon Blanc. Really enjoyed the grape quite a bit. Very refreshing. And what's really unique, I think, about Sauvignon Blanc is how much the regionalities comes through in these wines. We're going to look at 4 different countries. We have wines from France, New Zealand, California, and South Africa. And the main theme that we kind of looked at when putting these wines together, one of the big debates that we have about Sauvignon Blanc is the use of oak in either aging or fermentation, in the fermentation of the wines. So a lot of the wines we're going to have today are going to have a oak or a non-oak component to the wine. So we'll really talk about this, about the debate that's kind of ravaging the country, and how different countries have actually handled the debate about oak and and the lack of it. Sauvignon Blanc is one of the king grapes in France, particularly in the Loire Valley and also in Bordeaux. Loire Valley has very chalky soils. The main Sauvignon Blancs you hear from there are Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé. You also hear wines from Concy, Touraine, but the ones you'll see in most wine lists and in many stores will be pretty much Sancerre and the Loire Valley. Sauvignon Blanc is also grown extensively in the Bordeaux region. It's as a component with the red Bordeaux there. It's usually predominantly Sauvignon Blanc, but there's also oftentimes a large component of Semillon. The grapes are often blended together. The blend of the fruit, Sauvignon Blanc gives you a lot more acidity, a lot more freshness. Semillon adds a little bit more fat, a little bit more richness to the texture of the wine. It's very fascinating to see how both regions have handled the Sauvignon Blanc question. If you look at most Sancerres and Pouilly-Fumés, most of the wines have very, very little oak. The wines are either fermented in stainless steel. They don't see any oak aging. The idea is to preserve the freshness, preserve the acidity, and keep that freshness about it. Bordeaux, on the other hand, often sees wines aged in oak and fermented in oak and aged in oak as well. So they have a completely different profile. We're going to see that in the two wines we're going to taste today. We're going to start off with the Sancerre from Sylvain Bailly, and it's 2010 vintage. And if you look at this wine right here, you notice a very clear color to it. That doesn't have much hue to it. And when we look at the next wine from Bordeaux, we're going to see a very, very, very different color hue to it. And that's going to be really an impact from the oak. What I really like about Sancerre is the minerality. You get a very, very chalky, kind of stony mineral on the nose. Very fresh, really good with oysters and kind of lean seafood dishes, also sushi as well. When you try that, you get that really kind of chalky mineral from the soils that are over there. I'll have a little sip here because it's Sauvignon Blanc Day.
And the Sancerre is really renowned for those limestone soils, aren't they? Those chalky limestone soils, which create that slightly flinty, leaner approach, which is real pretty and attractive.
So you got a medium-bodied wine. There's a lot of citrus, a lot of zippy lemon and lime flavors. And one of the great things about this palate is just that refreshing acidity, that mineral component makes it work real well with a lot of different dishes and salads as well. Very refreshing in the middle of the day too, I must say.
I know there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace about Sauvignon Blanc versus Fumé Blanc. In the Loire Valley, Pouilly-Fumé is a Sauvignon Blanc, and Fumé means smoky. It kind of has a gunflint sort of a character that you get from the soils that Chuck talked about. But in the New World, especially in California, a lot of winemakers will put Fumé Blanc on their label rather than Sauvignon Blanc, more for marketing reasons. They're trying to suggest that maybe there's a smoky character in their wines as well, plenty when there often isn't one. Also, they're paying tribute to France, the birthplace of Sauvignon Blanc. But we're seeing more and more producers backing off of Fumé, just calling it Sauvignon Blanc, and I think being a little more truthful so the consumer knows exactly what they're getting.
In New Zealand, we used to use that term Fumé Blanc, but because most of our wines are exported, we can't export it to Europe using Fumé because it might get confused with Pouilly-Fumé.
Right, so it's illegal to label it.
Well,
Fumé,
if you export it, so it's gone. We don't use it. Yeah.
We've got a question from Twitter on how long does Sauvignon Blanc age before bottling? I think, does that mean after bottling? Probably?
No.
Yeah?
We could do both.
Yeah, because...
I'll do the before bottling. Basically, maturation before bottling is going to be either in tank or in barrel, depending on your decision on wine style as a winemaker. You know, we at St. Supéry, we do an unoaked version on our Sauvignon Blanc, and we're only on yeast lees or in tank for a couple of months. So a very short time. But I think some of those winemakers that prefer to be in barrel or want some more extended time on for lees contact, they might be in that situation for about 7 months, sometimes 8 months, not much more. That's before bottling. After bottling.
And after bottling, Sauvignon Blancs had a little bit of oak. They were really probably best drunk within the first 2 to 3 years. You want to keep that freshness, that acidity, that liveliness. So I find that Sancerres, unoaked Sauvignon Blancs, It's about that freshness and that vibrancy that the grape has that you want to capture that. Now, that doesn't mean that the Sauvignon Blancs don't age. I find a lot of the ones that have had a little bit of barrel fermentation, a little bit of oak aging, can age very well. Some of the best Bordeaux, some of the California examples that we've seen out there can go up to 10 years. And they take on a much richer texture. They lose the acidity. They get more honeyed, a lot more complexity, but it becomes more weighty. So that's what you're going to get if you age a Sauvignon Blanc. It's not going to be fresh or zippy. It's going to get more texture and a little bit rounder.
Actually, in my classes, I routinely offer Sauvignon Blanc 6 years apart, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. So we've got a young, just new release Sauvignon against an old one. And in the long term, the majority of people prefer the older Sauvignon Blanc. And I'm always intrigued by this, and I've started to drill down. And the ones who like the younger Sauvignon Blanc tend to be Sauvignon Blanc drinkers. They love the punchy fruit and the acidity and freshness. The ones who like the older Sauvignon Blanc, perhaps they're not so fussed about Sauvignon. Those wines are more like Chardonnay, starting to knock the edges off, get a bit rounded, a little bit more complex with age. And so you've got those two camps. The aging, I love age. I like them. I'm in both camps, I have to say.
I am too, but I usually can't wait to age it. I usually drink them way too soon.
That's the problem.
So a good segue to go to New Zealand with Bob Campbell. I happen to adore New Zealand. I've been 5 times, shamefully 5 times, and it's a gorgeous place. It's green, it's verdant, and you can almost see and taste what Sauvignon Blanc there is going to be because of its marine climate and the soils. So Bob, take us to New Zealand.
All right, and I'm going to start by responding to a question from someone out there who's asked us, should Sauvignon Blanc have real cork closures? I'm going to give a personal view there, and it's a very simple, short statement, and the answer is no. I think screw caps keep the wines much fresher, more vibrant. They actually, we have some experience in New Zealand. We started to go to screw caps in 2001, so we've got some history now, and they more than double the window of freshness, if you like, with Sauvignon. We find that under cork, a typical Marlborough Sauvignon starts to get canned asparagus characters almost at that 2-year point. With screw cap, 5, even 6 years, they start to move into that phase of development. So I'm a real fan of screw caps. We get consistency, and something that's often not talked about is screw caps. If you haven't got ideal storage conditions, screw caps are a great help because they don't leak like corks will under heat pressure. So yeah. But anyway, let me move on to New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and I guess we've got a fairly short history, even though we've made a bit of a name for ourselves with Sauvignon. The first Sauvignons vines that were planted in Marlborough and commercially planted in New Zealand on any scale were in 1973, which is not that long ago, because I was there, so it can't be too far. And they had a little trouble getting a crop because a drought came along and killed most of the vines, and they replanted them. And they finally, I guess our first really commercial production of Sauvignon came off in around about 1980, so early days. And it was always there in Marlborough waiting to happen. Marlborough's the capital, New Zealand capital of Sauvignon Blanc. They came along, put the vines in, and what they got was what we have today. It's been through a little bit of refinement, but basically it was a shock initially. Those first wines, I still remember them. They were like nothing we'd tried before, and
in what ways, Bob?
Well, I'd describe it as really punchy aromatics. They just leap out of you unscrew the screw cap. You don't use a cork, obviously. You unscrew the screw cap, and the wine leaks out of the bottle.
Super opulent. Just really super opulent Sauvignon Blanc type of style and flavour and aromatic.
Absolutely.
It just bounces out.
And you get this unique combination, I think, between of flavours. If you're lucky enough to be in a Marlborough vineyard just before harvest and you walk down the rows and find a bunch of Sauvignon grapes well exposed to the sun, they look quite sort of freckled, that's sunburn, and they'll be golden coloured. And if you pluck one of those berries off and pop it in your mouth, it's full of passion fruit, tropical fruit flavours. Take that same bunch turn it over to the green shaded underside, the berries are much smaller and greener and denser. Pop those in your mouth. Now that they're not nearly as sweet, more acidic, and you're getting gooseberry, cut grass, tomato leaf, green capsicum. You say pepper here, don't you? Bell pepper.
Sure.
Yeah.
And much more flavours from another planet. Now, when that bunch is picked and pressed, those flavours run together, and that's what I call the yin and yang of Marlborough Sauvignon. That contrast between exotic tropical fruit and the green grassy end of the spectrum, and that really sums it up. They're all about taste. Now, I've got another question coming in here. How does geology and soil affect Sauvignon Blanc? These are very different wines.
Good question.
That is a good question. Well,
Very complex answer.
I might throw shall I finish the New Zealand thing first, and then we move on to that?
Well, I think the question.
Deal with it now?
I think the question's interesting because New Zealand has so many different regions. How do those vary from, say, the top of the North Island versus lower in the South Island? Are they dramatically different in the soils?
Well, they're not dramatically different. Most of the Sauvignon soils are fairly free-draining, gravelly soils. Sauvignon don't like too much to get their feet too wet because they tend to be a little vigorous and produce a lot of leaf. So most of the free-draining soils. We do have pockets of which produce wines of a little tighter, tauter, perhaps less punchy aromatics and more minerally wines.
Similar to the Loire Valley.
Similar to the Loire. And by mineral, I should give an explanation here. If you have distilled water and mineral water and compare those, the mineral water often has that slightly salty, minerally taste. And that's what we pick up sometimes in these wines that are planted in chalky limestone soils. We see a soil influence for sure.
Well, to jump to California, there's very little limestone in California. There's some calcareous soils, which are a limestone type around the Paso Robles area in Mount Harlan, San Benito County. But we don't have that sort of soil here. And Michael can talk about this when we taste the St. Supéry, but you get a different flavor profile, a different weight from not having that limestone soil. But that opens up all these styles of Sauvignon Blanc from all over the world. They're made in Italy, Australia, Chile, all over the world. Washington State is making Sauvignon Blanc. New York State, Long Island makes Sauvignon Blanc. That there is such a cornucopia of styles to choose from based on where the grapes are grown, and then secondarily, the winemaker's influence on those grapes. And we'll really see some strong winemaking influence coming up. And
I think if you ignore the oak age wines, because that's the winemaker having a bit of fun, I think if we look at the fruited Sauvignons, that what you get, your tasting place, they are a very, very good, solid expression of place. So a Marlborough Sauvignon tastes very different to a Sancerre, and we're picking up that geology, that soil and climate character. Yeah.
And lots of marine influence. I mean, New Zealand is
enormous.
Really two small islands surrounded by lots of water, and you're never far from the ocean where you're growing grapes.
Exactly. I could quickly run through these three wines. We've got 3 New Zealand wines here today. The first wine we've got is a monster. I call it Marlborough Sauvignon and Drag. This is St. Clair Wairau Reserve. It's just bigger than Ben Hur. If you're not sure what Sauvignon tastes like, taste this wine. It does it in spades. Just a huge mouthful of and they break the rules. Normally, Sauvignon growers tend to plant in quite low fertile soils, but St. Clair, who are one of our leading Sauvignon Blanc makers, prefer the heavy, rich soils, and normally all of that fertility translates into a lot of leaves, and then you get a lot of shading and some problems occurring. But if you plant in those heavy soils and work the canopy and don't let the leaves become too excessive, it translates into a very, very concentrated wine like that. So that's the first wine. The second wine we've got is a wine by a wonderful Frenchman, Henri Bourgeois, and he has a great Sauvignon, a great Sancerre winery in Sancerre in the Loire Valley in France, and making terrific wines. I just love his Sancerre, and he just fell in love with Marlborough and produces a wine now in Marlborough under the Clos Henri label, and he has a different spin on it. He says he's not trying to produce Sancerre, but I notice on his website he actually describes it as having a mouth-filling Sancerre-like finish. So he sort of backed off that stuff a little bit. But what they do is just produce no oak. It's just a fruity Sauvignon, but sit in the tank with the dead yeasts from fermentation, and those yeasts start to decompose, and the wine feeds off those yeasts. I guess the yeasts are fed off the wine, and now the wine feeds off the yeast, and it adds texture and flavour to the wine, and we get this lovely sort of richness that results. And he keeps them on the lees in stainless steel tank for about 9-10 months before bottling. So that harks back to that earlier question: how long do you? And then the next wine so I call that's Marlborough Sauvignon with a French accent, and then we've got Dog Point Vineyard Section 94, and this is your funky Sauvignon. It's Sauvignon Gin, but not as we know it. This is oak aged, been through a malolactic fermentation. Not to get too technical here, but the wine is really funky. They use a yeast that gives reductive character, and I'm going to let the experts talk about what reductivity is if they want to do that. And you get a sort of almost a matchsticky, minerally tautness in the wine, which you love or hate. And the winemaker, James Healy, says, we like this wine. It makes a very bold statement. It's different from all the rest. We love it, but a lot of people hate it. Just as many people love it, and we don't care. We just make it for us and the people who love it. So. Yeah.
One of the interesting things that's happening in New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is this trend towards getting away from the 100% stainless steel and making the wine fresh. And the winemakers are now getting more actively involved in terms of fermentation and oak aging. So there's a whole slew of new wines. Dog Point is actually a follow-up on Cloudy Bay's Tekoko, which is one of the pioneering wines from New Zealand that started barrel fermentation, malolactics, and wild yeast. This is a follow-up. There's other wines called Grey Wacky Wild is another good example of that style. That's Kevin Judd. Both Kevin Judd at Grey Wacky and Mr. Healy from Dog Point both worked at Cloudy Bay, so they're taking that style of Tekoko and interpreting it themselves. But it's a it's a new trend, and it's a very, very different style of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. The winemakers are really enjoying it, and it's become very, very popular in New Zealand. It's a new style for the country, and it's a very different interpretation of Sauvignon Blanc. And this is constantly you see in the debate about Sauvignon Blanc, should it have oak or no oak. I think in New Zealand you could see very easily you could do both. And it's just a different style of wine.
Right, and there's also a much different pricing structure. Wines that tend to have oak and lees stirring, which is that stirring of the spent yeast cells in the barrel or sometimes in the tank, you're going to pay $20 more U.S. for that wine than you would for a stainless steel fermented, clean, crisp, classic Kiwi Sauvignon Blanc. So there's also a pricing level that people find to their...
You're really saying it's a winemaker expression and an adjustment in style. Winemakers just taking the style to a different place, seeing what else they can do, and expressing something else within those wines. I think you see that variation on those three wines quite significantly.
Yeah. I think the St. Clair is all about taste. It's just about this incredibly punchy fruit. The Clos Henri with that yeast contact is a sort of combination of taste and texture. And then we go to Dog Point. To me, that's all about texture. That's more about texture than taste.
Right.
So they've got those two considerations.
And when we talk about texture and oaking, a lot of these winemakers who are giving their wine some oak influence are not using heavily toasted barrels. They're using neutral barrels or lightly toasted, because the worst thing you can do to Sauvignon Blanc with its beautiful aromatics is to kill it with a toasty, oaky character. So the barrel is used more to add mouthfeel, but what we call texture to the wine, without imparting any charry oak flavors. So it's a fine line on oak, and some wines are going to taste a little oakier than others, and others are just going to have a palate feel that tells you it spent time in oak without being a charry character.
I was going to say, it's a really good thing to do before you buy a Sauvignon. Just figure out, usually you might have to go to the back label, figure out whether it's a non-oak or an oak wine. And that's a really important division to start with. And then we can go from there.
Or ask a retailer like Chuck, who knows these wines like the back of his hand. When you're at a restaurant and you're looking at the wine list, have the sommelier or the wine steward explain the styles to you so you can find the one that best suits your mood, your season, and what you're having for your meal. And let's get back to the reductive character thing. I think Michael, being the technician that you are, can tell us what reduction is.
Oh, listen,
the easy version. It's a talking point with Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah, no, it is. It gets a little curly. I mean, if you get into the chemistry side of things, it's about sulfides in wine, and those sulfides being evident, so they have an aromatic influence on the wine.
Not sulfites, sulfide.
Sulfide, yeah. But how do we get that down to a descriptive term? I guess it's Bob said it. It's that matchstick quality. You see a slight burnt matchstick sort of quality. That is often referred to as a reduced character. You see that there. You see it on the flavour, but particularly aromatically. And you do see a bit of that in the Dog Point. I see that there. It's not necessarily bad. It's enjoyed by many people, not enjoyed by all. So it's sort of a subjective thing. You check it out, and you taste it and decide for yourself.
It's one of the things that it's a very controversial. You're seeing that not just in Sauvignon Blanc, but with Chardonnay as well. This sulfidic character to the wine. One of my complaints is it does kind of mask the freshness of that zippy fruit, and that's kind of what you want in a Chardonnay or a Sauvignon Blanc, is that freshness of the useful fruit. That's what the grape growers and winemakers do so hard to capture that.
Right.
But there's also the other complexity and textures you get from the barrel fermentation techniques and doing these winemaker style additions to the fruit. It's just there isn't one right or wrong answer. They're both interesting wines. It's just really important that you find out the style of Sauvignon Blanc that you like.
Which you prefer. Also, we were talking about screw caps, and I always referred to New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc with screw cap as the Kiwi click of quality, and because I knew I was going to get a good bottle. But winemakers were very, very focused on not having their wines reduced, because once the screw cap goes on, it is a closed anaerobic environment, and so there's no oxygen, and so you get that sulfidey character with that trapped under screw cap.
You can get it.
You can.
You
can. Yes, it takes careful winemaking and careful bottling at the time of bottling. Yeah. But now there are so many different screw cap options, twist off options, where the liner inside the cap actually can breathe, and the cap itself, the aluminum cap, actually can have microscopic openings that let that reduction, it prevents reduction. So there are options now for winemakers in the types of screw cap that they put on their wine. Well, I think it's time to go to St. Supéry Winery in Rutherford, California for just a 2-minute break. Scott Tracy, who is the guest experience manager at the winery, is with the Oyster Girls to tell us why Sauvignon Blanc and oysters go so beautifully together. Scott?
I guess we're having more fun than anyone else because we're having oysters with our Sauvignon Blanc.
Yes, we don't have.
Well, you can come to St. Supéry today. I wish everyone would. We have the beautiful oyster girls here and magnificent oysters. We want to tell you how much fun we're having. So we're beginning with our Sauvignon Blanc and the Miyagi oysters. So we love the way they work together. And I just want to mention that the Sauvignon Blanc, having the brightest city that does, is magical with oysters. And we're going to have to talk about the oysters as well because it's so special.
Absolutely. So all of our oysters today are grown in Tomales Bay, and they were pulled out of the water this morning. So we're talking the ultimate freshest oyster that you can have. It's like going right out to the bay yourself. And we have, we're going to start with the lovely Tomales Bay Petite Miyagi. And it is grown in an area which is very close to the ocean. So you're going to have a lot of upfront brine flavors. And sort of a very nice, if you actually let the oyster linger for a little bit, you'll get some of those other nice traces, which is sort of ripe vegetables.
You make such a beautiful point, because when we talk about drinking wine and tasting wine, they're so different. Oysters as well, if you let those flavors linger, you start to see the finish of the wine, you start to see what you're paying for in the special oysters. Very much key. Our second wine is our Semillon. We chose it with the Golden Nugget these are impossible to find, and so we're lucky that we have talent with it that knows where to find these beautiful oysters. There's a lovely sweetness to them, and so we love how our Semillon has a little bit of a richer center to speak to that richness of that oyster.
Scott, this is a very, very special oyster. It's grown by Tamales Bay Oyster Company, and it is actually grown in bags where they are naturally tumbled. And so you get this very beautiful, round, salted oyster, and just like Scott mentioned, it brings a lot of butter and even notes of artichoke as the oyster layer.
I love that you're here speaking because it gave me a chance to eat an oyster. Yes, so, yes, everything she said was very true. Yes, your turn, because we can't just talk about fun and have people believe it.
Cheers.
Now we have our Sauvignon Blanc from Dollar Hide. It has a little more richness. It has a little more body. And so we've selected this with the...
We're on the third oyster here, so we're going to be doing the Kumamoto. Also a very special oyster, grown in Tamales Bay. This oyster grows very slowly, so we have to wait a long time for it. And our local Kumamoto is also briny up front, but it'll have sort of a cucumber finish.
Love cucumber. So your last wine is Virtue. This is a blended wine. I selected it with the Drake's Bay. I love that this has a little bit of a richness, but still has that white Sauvignon Blanc quality to it. So we're beautifully with the mineral tones in the Drake's Bay. Quite a big oyster, is it not?
Wow, that sounds delicious. I'm a little disappointed that we don't have oysters in front of us here for all these great Sauvignon Blancs. But you can go to this event at St. Supéry Winery in Rutherford, California. Go to hashtag Sauv Blanc. Go to St. Supéry between 1 and 4 today to taste oysters and the 4 wines that go with them. It's a fantastic opportunity to see just how well these two products go together and to see a fantastic winery that has a new visitor center that is to die for. You can see in the background. One of my favorite places to visit, especially when I'm taking friends from out of the area. So do visit St. Supéry today for Sauvignon Blanc and oysters. Let's talk a little bit about food pairing. Not to be too technical about it, because I tend to eat what I want and drink what I want and have some sort of a sense just within myself of what's going to go well. But I spent 15 years as a pescatarian, eating just vegetarian and seafood. And so Sauvignon Blanc has been my go-to white wine for all those 15 years. I've since broken the rules a little bit, and I eat the occasional pork and bacon. But all the foods that I love to eat, which are salads and like asparagus and fresh, lively foods, vinaigrette, things like that, fish both raw and cooked, have been beautiful companions with Sauvignon Blanc. And goat cheese is another classic along with oysters. That creamy, salty, tangy bit of the cheese matches perfectly with the wine. But I want to ask each of the panelists what some of their favorite pairings are with Sauvignon Blanc. Chuck.
Well, I've always been, this debate about no oak or with oak, I've always been a little bit more on the oaky side. I always like to say, God did not give us stainless steel, God gave us trees. So I always appreciate a richer, more textured Sauvignon Blanc. And I find this, that kind of weighty, richer style works very well with chicken. You're talking, if you have a little bit more of that kind of caramely, oaky note on that, that's where that bacon could come in real well. But, think about the weight of the Sauvignon Blanc. If it's got richer, more texture, if it's barrel fermented, you can stand up to richer dishes. I think you'll find this very, very versatile.
Michael.
Well, I'll tell you what, those oysters sound fantastic, and I reckon that'll work
My
like a
mouth
charm.
is watering right
Blanc.
now. This is torture.
If you get there before me, there'll be some left. But look, Sauvignon Blanc is great with the seafood, shellfish, all that kind of stuff. Salads with a bit of a vinaigrette dressing, because the acids in Sauvignon Blanc can carry that a bit. I like it with ahi, like ahi pokey. When you got ahi pokey, you got a little balsamic vinaigrette, a little sesame oil. Perhaps have it with a wonton cracker, that kind of thing. That's pretty exciting stuff. I enjoy that. But hey, I enjoy food. I enjoy wine. So.
There goes the
I'm a lover of oysters and Sauvignon. They're just a great match, and I agree with your comments about seafood. I have a wife who finds Sauvignon sometimes a little too acidic. She's normal in other respects, but My solution to that, salmon. I think salmon goes very well with Sauvignon, and to give it a squeeze of lemon on the salmon, and that pulls down the acidity in the wine. So you can actually moderate I've tested her with the same wine on 2 occasions, with and without the salmon, with a squeeze of lemon, and she doesn't like it straight. With the salmon, fantastic. Right. So a big difference.
Yep.
A nice thing to do to manipulate the acidity if you want to do that. So,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Excellent.
And two of the most difficult and coming in season food ingredients for any kind of wine are artichokes and asparagus. They have a metallic character, a very herbaceousness that Sauvignon Blanc just kind of melds and meets beautifully with. Probably the fresher no oak styles than those that have oak, because that oak layer can be a bit too heavy and you might get some clanging of your palate. But a fresh, crisp, non-oak Sauvignon Blanc is beautiful with these notoriously difficult ingredients to match. Also, spicy foods often go well with Sauvignon Blanc, especially if we're talking about, well, in New Zealand and Australia, capsicum, which are bell peppers and jalapenos and things like that. The spicy kick, a little bit of chili can go very nicely with these. You don't want a habanero, you don't want a ghost chili pepper, but a milder chili, like in ceviche. I like to put some jalapeno in my ceviche, marinate it in lime juice, and have Sauvignon Blanc. It's beautiful, and you don't get any sort of a clash of heat in your mouth. So very versatile wine, goes with lots and lots of things.
I will say one thing, though. When you have a good crisp Sauvignon Blanc with that good acidity and that great minerality, you get thirsty, and that means you want to eat. So just be prepared to eat. That's what I say.
Yeah. Eat oysters. So I think we can jump to California now.
Sure.
And Michael Scholes, who is the winemaker at St. Supéry, has made wine in California, France, South Africa, and Australia, where his family owns a winery, Willow's Vineyard. So Michael worked there in the 80s, got his winemaking education in Australia, in the Barossa Valley is where the winery is, and has been around the world since, and that's Supéry. So tell us a little bit about your wine.
Sure. I've been working with St. Supéry since the mid-90s on a lot of wines, obviously, particularly with Sauvignon Blanc. We created this unoak style of Sauvignon Blanc back in '96. And when I say unoak, that's the wine that's in front of you right now, the St. Supéry Napa Valley Estate Sauvignon Blanc. And that is what it is. We tank this wine, and we've talked about a number of different styles. And the decision we've made with this wine is to go in that tank fermented direction, with the goal being to capture true Sauvignon Blanc expression, a vibrant wine that's very opulent in aromatics, and it carries its acid well, so it's quite bright and crisp with that natural acidity. But of course, well, I say that compared to some of the wines just before it, the acids aren't quite as high. Still prevalent, but not quite as high. But it's a bright, crisp wine. Why would that be? Essentially, because we're not a New Zealand wine, we're a California wine, and we grow on a location which we have a coastal influence, but, with very cold nights, but we have very warm days. And it really allows us to press forward with this opulence that comes out of our vineyard, and we achieve those sort of grapefruit and a hint of green lime, those aromatics, that flavour profile, a bit of that citrus quality, and so forth. And, we talked about New Zealand before, a couple of little islands surrounded by an enormous amount of water, so all these vineyards are very close to the ocean and very cold waters, so you have a very cooling effect on those vineyards, and hence, so situations like that tend to retain acid, so you carry more acidity in those wines. At California, we're a little warmer. When you have a warmer location, you tend to degrade your acids in the vineyard a little sooner. So we tend to be crisp, but perhaps not quite as much as those, which is a nice contrast. It's very interesting to see that. But what we're trying to do is when we make the wine, get terrific flavour on the vine, bring it in, vinify it in those tanks under very cool conditions. That allows us to retain the brightness and the freshness of the wine. And then we leave it in tank for a short time prior to bottling. And the reason we do that is because we're trying to do that, capture youthful vibrance and freshness for this wine. Illustrate what Sauvignon Blanc is here in California or in the Napa Valley, and particularly on our estate, and capture that in the bottle to show it here in that bright, vibrant approach. That's what we're doing.
Now, you also make a Sauvignon Blanc that has some oak influence, correct?
We do, actually.
We don't have it here today, but can you tell us just a little bit about the thinking behind that and what sort of wine it is?
Sure. That's the St. Supéry Dollarhide Sauvignon Blanc. And what we're doing with that is we are taking on a little bit of oak in that wine because it adjusts the style, allows us to bring a little more texture through the wine, which we've discussed today. And, of course, an oak influence, because the wine that we do is the component that's in barrels is in new French oak barrels. Now, that can be a little overwhelming on Sauvignon Blanc, but we only do 1/5 of the blend in barrel. The other 80% of the blend is tank fermented, similar to what you see in the wine here. And then we pull those components together after about 7 months on yeast leaves. So we have a number of things happening there. Number one, we have the tank fermented component that's really bright and opulent. Then we have the barrel fermented component that brings in that nice, elegant French oak component and a real toasted barrel. So you get a real smoky sort of approach. Remember we talked about Pouilly Fumé before, or the Fumé Blanc? We sort of draw on some of those concepts just a little there. But it's a real undercurrent in that wine. We don't look for the oak to be strong or dominant. We look for it to be evident, but an undercurrent, so the fruit is really what blossoms first and what you see first. But it's an interesting wine. It's a different approach to the style than what you see in the glass here today, but really cool wine. So that's a Dollarhide Sauvignon Blanc. Mm.
Just personally for me, the most disappointing thing is if I don't know a style of Sauvignon Blanc and I buy one at the store or have it at the restaurant, and it doesn't smell or taste like Sauvignon Blanc, that it has been exposed to other techniques like barrel fermentation, barrel aging, leaf stirring, whatever, where I can no longer identify that Sauvignon Blanc. This has such personality as a grape that I don't like to see winemakers mess with that. But they do have an audience for it, and I think the Dollarhide, which I had just a few weeks ago, is a beautiful wine. It's still varietally correct. You know exactly what it is. It's got a little more nuance, a little more depth than the estate Napa Valley. So I think it's a slippery slope, and I think the Dog Point is a bit of a slippery slope. But then James finds plenty of people to buy it,
sure.
and at a pretty high price tag too. Yeah. So we all like different things, and that's why we all have jobs in the wine business. We like different kinds of wine.
I like the Saint Supéry. I love the texture for a non-oak Sauvignon. It's very textural and really rich, creamy texture that I find very pleasing.
And I think that's, we're talking about regionality and how it affects Sauvignon Blanc. And this is a classic Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc. It's full of melons. It's got that texture you're talking about. It doesn't have the racy acidity or the top minerality that you get from some of the cooler regions. But this is classic, round, succulent, easy to drink Sauvignon Blanc. And it's that melons, honeydew, kind of passion, honeydew, I think is probably I would describe most accurately to it. But it's a very specific flavor you're not going to get from Sonoma County, Russian River, or maybe up in Anderson Valley, it's a lot colder.
It's real regionality, isn't it? It shows what the Sauvignon Blanc from Napa and what you can achieve with it. And that's what we're doing.
Here's a question for Michael. Do you use Aussie winemaking techniques? Did you transplant any of that Aussiness to Saint Supéry?
What is an Aussie winemaking?
Well, there you go. I do have New Zealand to pipe in on this one.
I think it's the brand of beer they drink after the winemaking is over that makes it an Aussie tea.
Exactly. Hey, listen, yes, a little, because in Australia, a lot of the wines that the consumers drink are wines that carry pretty good acid. They're bright, they're crisp. We obviously see a lot of influence from New Zealand into Australia and vice versa. So I did come to California with a bit of that idea because that's the wines I've been drinking. And we brought that here, and the goal was to bring opulence and true varietal expression. That's what I was trying to achieve. And if you look at that, you look at the Sauvignon Blancs out of the Adelaide Hills in South Australia, where I'm from, they have that type and that style, similar to the New Zealand wines. It's a different region again, so they're not New Zealand, they're Adelaide Hills wine. But the style is very similar and the approach is similar to be bright, opulent and crisp. So that's hence what we brought.
Until Michael got to Saint Supéry and until New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs started coming to the U.S., we all know that Cloudy Bay was the first big splash, and then there was Kim Crawford and some others in the mid to late 90s where we started seeing some kiwi wines in volume. You saw a lot of California winemakers change their style to go to this more brisk, refreshing, a little bit pungent, a little bit daring to be herbaceous, instead of giving it lots of oak or making it a Chardonnay wannabe. For Scott in the wine business, this is not something I'm not particularly proud of, but I would buy California Sauvignon Blanc because it tasted like Chardonnay but was half the price. That's before I got in the wine business and learned to drink better and to learn more. So I think Michael's efforts and those of some others, especially Aussies who have come to the U.S. and some Kiwis who have worked at wineries in the U.S., have kind of led us down an alternative path and for the better for the category, I think.
And she's absolutely right about that. Back in the late starting probably in the early 1900s, we used to call it poor man Chardonnay. But it was a new interpretation of Sauvignon Blanc. The oak was very strong. It was usually barrel fermented, again, malolactic to give you a lot more texture. That was a very, very strong theme. Murphy Good was a good example of that style. We really saw a lot more of those kind of Chardonnay kind of flavors to it. This swing away from that is very, very strong in California. You rarely see a lot of barrel fermented or barrel aged Sauvignon Blancs. We've kind of gone all the way the other direction to capture that fresh fruit, to capture that acidity. And that's something that's really almost, it's been a combination of New Zealand, but also just a general look across all grapes to get away from oak and really keep the fruit forward.
Right.
But one of the wines I think that's really made a statement recently has been Mary Edwards Sauvignon Blanc, and this is a very, very different interpretation and a move back in the oak street. Want to talk a little bit about Mary Edwards?
If you're able to taste these two wines side by side, as we all are, they couldn't be more different. Mary Edwards, I actually worked one harvest in 1990. This is when I learned to drink better. I worked for Mary Edwards when she was at a Pinot Noir producer in Russian River Valley. And I've known her ever since. This is 1990. She's always made Sauvignon Blanc. You might know her wines from Matanzas Creek from the 1980s, which won awards. And so she's always had it in her heart and soul to make Sauvignon Blanc, but she's only been making it for her own winery for about 10 years. Mary's based in the Russian River Valley, and all the grapes from this wine are from Russian River Valley. But this wine is fermented in 82% neutral French oak and about 18% new French oak. So it doesn't spend time in a stainless steel tank. It goes right to barrels. The wine is fermented in the barrels. She stirs those yeast leaves that we talked about. When the leaves die off after they've done their job of converting sugar to alcohol, she stirs those barrels twice a week to get that creamy character that this wine has. It's a little more creamier. It's actually oakier than the wine before it, and it would being in barrel that period of time. She also has two different clones. We've talked about various winemaking styles, but in vineyards there are several Sauvignon Blanc clones, which are mutations of the mother plant of Sauvignon Blanc, and they're all over the world. But there's a particular one called Muscat clone. And so Mary uses about 20% of the Muscat Sauvignon clone, which kind of gives this lifted floral aromatics and a little bit more depth. But the oak is certainly here. You know that she's put the wine in oak, but it still retains its lightness, its freshness. It's got crisp apple and tropical flavors. It's sort of a tweener Sauvignon Blanc for me. You want the freshness, but you do want some bit of oak, very much like the wine from Bordeaux that we've got. So she's been very successful at it. She's a James Beard Award winner last week for her time in the industry, and also in the California Vintners Hall of Fame.
Yeah, she's a fabulous winemaker. Yeah. She really is. And this is a really interesting wine. I think it's got almost a floral blossom-like quality to the aromatic. Mm-hmm. I think maybe the Muscat brings that, because Muscat can do that, bring a little slight floral component to your aromas. And also it brings a little more texture through your palate for that particular selection of Sauvignon Blanc. But it's really a cool wine. Very different to the Saint Supéry, of course, and that's the beauty of the whole tasting, really.
And I think, again, this is where the terroir comes through. This is grown in Russian River. It's much cooler. It's a great area for Pinot Noir. The Chardonnays tend to be a little crisper and a little bit leaner. And I think it's the fact that this fruit has got more varietal character to it, which you get in cooler regions, more acidity. The oak is a little bit more integrated, so this is a more balanced where the fruit and the oak are more seamlessly integrated. Mm-hmm. If you had a riper fruit Sauvignon Blanc, it would kind of overwhelm it and get more of that kind of Chardonnay texture. So this acidity keeps it really fresh without overpowering. It keeps the oak in check.
There's no question about what variety it is. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just Sauvignon leaps out of the glass.
It's rather remarkable that wineries in Napa and Sonoma are even growing Sauvignon Blanc in prime, cool areas, which Sauvignon Blanc tends to like a cooler area, because in the case of Mary Edwards and perhaps with Saint Supéry, I don't know for sure, this land could be far more valuable to grow Pinot Noir, where you get 5 times the grape price or 5 times the bottle price. But there are people who are so devoted to Sauvignon Blanc that they're willing to do that, to give up what could be Pinot ground or Cabernet Sauvignon ground and devote it to this grape. So I think I want applause to all those people that are helping us consumers out.
Hey, we love Sauvignon Blanc.
That's it. And that reminds me, you're not too late to send your questions to us via Twitter, #SolveBlanc. We've got a few more minutes, so please send us your questions. And now we're going to South Africa, to the Cape of South Africa. Chuck?
Yes. Well, one of the things we did when we tried to look at the panoply of Sauvignon Blancs going around the world was to maybe explore a country that's fairly new to the world of wine in America, and that's South Africa. South African wines have been exported ever since apartheid was done. They made a major statement in the United States. And the grape that's really made a statement for South Africa, besides Pinot has been Sauvignon Blanc. It's captured a lot of people's imaginations. There's a real freshness to it as a grape. And they are also doing what's been happening in New Zealand, which is trying to figure out, do we talk about Sauvignon Blancs that are fresh and varietal, or how does oak become part of the wine? It's a debate that's in France has been settled. They realize that Bordeaux is probably better suited to oak. You don't see it as much in the Loire Valley. It's just starting to be happening in New Zealand. South Africa is the same thing. So we have two Sauvignon Blancs. This is probably, the one we have right here is Mulderbach, run in the Stellenbosch area. This is about 1 hour outside of Cape Town. So again, it has that coastal influence to help keep the acidity and the freshness going. And Mulderbach has become a cult Sauvignon Blanc within America very, very quickly. I find there's a very similarity to New Zealand in that fresh varietal character. You get wines like Mulderbach. There's no oak on this. This is all about passion fruit. A little bit more of the melony fruit flavors you might get from Napa, and some of that kind of grainy minerality you get from Sancerre. So I find it's kind of got a little bit of each of these three regions kind of put into one glass. And I think you'll find, again, it's got that textural component. It's got that, it's Sauvignon Blanc, but it's got that freshness as well. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the New Zealand and South Africa connection with Sauvignon Blanc?
I think you really nailed it in your description. To me, that's like a fusion of so many different Sauvignon Blancs that regional Sauvignon Blancs that I really like. And it's always surprised me that South Africa has performed so well in Sauvignon, given the climate. I tend to think, coming from New Zealand, that it's got to be, you can't make decent Sauvignon. Only winemakers who wear overcoats can make good Sauvignon. So you need a little cool, but they do it.
But it's been a very, very successful grape for them, and it's been really, there's a number of very good value prices. You don't see much Sauvignon Blanc over $15, $16. So they're a great alternative if you want to try something a little bit different and explore Sauvignon Blanc's interpretations in a different country. Other countries, by the way, that are kind of making a name for themselves, we talked a little bit about Australia, the Adelaide Hills. One thing about New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc in Australia, though, is top selling wines top 10 selling wines in Australia, 7 of them are New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs.
And there's quite a Hatfield and McCoy, Dodgers, Yankees competitive there.
I don't really get the point.
I've got some good Aussie winemaker mates who aren't talking to me at the moment.
And just to show you how pervasive Sauvignon Blanc has become in Australian culture, they did a analysis of the cellar for the Prime Minister, and they found hundreds of cases of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc in Australia's Prime Minister's cellar. So that is not the right thing to do there.
Sounds like a story made up late at night for me.
A cleansing nail story.
Another country to look at is Chile. Chile is really starting to make a name for itself with Sauvignon Blanc. Again, very, very well priced. They're just learning the right locations and the right appellations to plant them, and they're finding the cooler regions that are more appropriate to Sauvignon Blanc. So Chile is another good alternative if you want to see a different interpretation of Sauvignon Blanc. Mm-hmm. One of the fascinating things about South Africa, though, is this new generation of young winemakers that are being very adventurous and looking to new styles. South Africa was always very constricted by government regulations in terms of how they could make wine, what they were allowed to make. Chardonnay was actually an illegal varietal, and you were not allowed to import Chardonnay vines into South Africa for many, many years. So we now have a generation of winemakers that have been making wine freely. They've got access to equipment that they didn't have, that their parents didn't have. So there's this real revolution of winemaking styles. And they've been one of the first regions to really embrace biodynamics. In my visit there about 6 years ago, biodynamics, very, very hot topic. the Sauvignon Blanc we're going to taste here in a second was about that. They're also doing a lot. They were one of the first regions to really embrace alternative winemaking techniques. We've heard a lot about concrete eggs. We're hearing a lot about using different types of fermentation vessels, different shapes. And South Africa has been doing this for quite a long time. This is a Reineke Sauvignon Blanc. This is another winery out of the Stellenbosch area. And this is 100% biodynamics. You notice a little bit more color here. Again, when you have a little bit more barrel fermentation, you're going to have a little bit more of a golder color. That's if you have a sommelier or a wine store that doesn't really know much about their wine, you could actually almost, if you see kind of golder hue in a very, very young wine, you could probably predict it's got a little bit of a barrel fermentation, a little oak treatment. But again, this has got a great combination of that kind of gunflint sulfidic character that you see in the dog point. The oak is probably a little bit more spicy. And there's definitely more weight and more texture to this wine than you get with this, the Mulderbach.
Yeah, it's a little more complex because it's got more of that texture. You tend to see a lot more of that yeast lees quality that comes along with barrel maturation and more time on the yeast lees for the maturation period. So interesting wine, again, very cool style.
Yeah. We looked at all these wines, we've seen a real striking difference between the freshness, crispness, and the acidity of unoaked wines and the trade-off you get with barrel fermentation, which is that oak, a little bit more, definitely more weight and more heaviness of texture, which is a component I really like and very, very good with richer dishes and food.
Mm-hmm. I've also seen some winemakers, mostly in California, who maybe can't get their Sauvignon Blanc grapes quite ripe. So basically what they have is a real lemony, a one-note profile of lemon juice, and they give it a little oak character just to plump up that lemon. It doesn't work particularly well. So you still need to get Sauvignon Blanc ideally ripe to get these boisterous flavors that were in the St. Clair and to hold up to the oak in the Mary Edwards. But the thing that always strikes me is that we in the United States are in a fabulous place because the world wants us to buy their wines. New Zealand is a country of, 4 million people or so? So export is the only way that its wine industry can survive, and it's targeted the UK, it's targeted the United States in particular as target markets for their wines, and South Africa is doing the same thing now that apartheid has gone away and there are trade agreements now between our countries. So there's never been a better time to drink great Sauvignon Blanc than now from all over the world. So I think our takeaway here, our message is it's a versatile wine. It's a vibrant, mouth-watering, delicious wine. It can be simple to complex and everything in between. Usually a very good value, especially for the unoaked styles. It's just a great, great wine for this time of year, for my generation, and for years to come. So I want to thank all the panelists for being here, Chuck, Michael, and Bob, and to Toot Sweet for hosting this show. And please, when you're done with this, go drink Sauvignon Blanc. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Cheers.